It's time for Forward Nation Radio. Now here he is, the host of Forward Nation Radio, David Leventhal.
Welcome to Forward Nation Radio with me, David Leventhal. Thank you for joining us. An MIT study this week found what we all suspected, which is that lies spread faster and further than the truth. So let us begin today's show by saying that the president is in fact a very stable genius with a very large penis. There, that should do wonders for our likes. Okay, on today's show. Now for the truth version of today's show, which doesn't figure to move around quite as quickly. On today's show, democracy, voting shocker, guns and taxes edition, White House soap opera, and statecraft, Trump style. But first we begin with a sad note. The world's IQ took a big hit in the last 24 hours with the death of Stephen Hawking, the renowned astrophysicist who brought astrophysics to normal people and made astrophysics and intelligence seem like they were fun, finally succumbed to his neuromotor disease. Stephen Hawking also made us wonder, how is it possible that he is actually of the same species as, I don't know, the President of the United States, perhaps? Anyway, let's get started by talking about democracy and some of the recent events that teach us a little bit about democracy, starting in Pennsylvania, where it appears that March will be coming in like a lion and, in fact, going out like a Democratic lamb. Okay, that was a really bad pun, but you can edit that in post-edit. You got to do something with that name. Anyway, it looks like Democrat Conor Lamb, at the moment that we are doing this, looks like he has upset the Republican Joe Saccone for a congressional seat in Western Pennsylvania. How big a deal is this? Well, let's start with they are replacing a longtime Republican Congressman, Tim Murphy, who was forced to step down because, this is just too much fun to pass up, this virulently anti-abortion congressman who felt that women should be denied the right to get an abortion told his mistress when he got her pregnant that she should get an abortion. Somehow that didn't play well in Republican circles and he had to step down. He's being replaced in a district that voted for Trump and Mitt Romney by about 20 points. That, in fact, in the last two congressional elections, he ran unopposed. And now it looks like the Democrat has won, proving to Democrats that it's worth fighting over every seat. Who knows, maybe you can win. This is a huge upset. Assuming that it plays out that way, we now get to see the great irony of Republicans fighting the results and undoubtedly screaming for a recount and a hand count of all the ballots. Presumably they will fly in the same Republican campaign staffers that they flew to Florida 18 years ago to contest the presidential election and the idea that people might count the votes. Now the same people will protest that they might not hand count the votes. Hypocrisy, Republican style. What will this mean? This means continued energized Democratic base. This means if they could still get out now, a whole bunch more Republican congressmen are going to announce that they're not running for re-election because the handwriting is on the wall. It looks like the wave that we are all praying for in only 7.5 months from now is actually going to be as big as we hope it needs to be. What will this mean to Republicans? It means you better step up your efforts for voter suppression. it means you better fight those gerrymandering decisions. And you better pray that the United States Supreme Court lets you destroy labor unions. Because one other thing that this election showed was the power, where they still exist, of labor unions. And yet, in light of Stephen Hawking's death, we ask ourselves, how is it possible that this blue-collar, working-class district is overwhelmingly Republican? More democracy on the guns front. Donald Trump, earlier in the week, walked back his support for increased gun laws. Who could have seen that one coming? Seriously, who could have seen that one coming? Donald Trump changing his mind on something so important? The man who said he was independent of the NRA, he was not cowed by the NRA. The man who reminded us of his bravery by he would run in unarmed to confront school shooters. Oh, we're back to being the bitch of the NRA. Trump said, turns out there wasn't a lot of popular support for the efforts to raise the age to buy guns from 18 to 21. No, it's true. In the latest Rasmussen poll, only 2/3 of Americans believe that this would be a good idea. Or, as Trump might put it, a minority of Americans. But you have to understand, those 2/3 were outnumbered because the NRA gets infinity votes. Infinity. Yeah, I'm not really sure what infinity means, but I know it's a lot. Because I know that I'm trying to get my debt and the country's debt up to infinity. So, the NRA gets infinity votes, and it turns out that they get to win, and Trump has walked it back. Making sure that we all know how big a bitch to the NRA he is and they are. The NRA has helpfully helped the Republicans figure out how to blame school shootings on Obama. That's what we were missing. That's right, it turns out school shootings are Obama's fault because of his discipline policy that tried to end the school to prison pipeline for minority children, overwhelmingly. That's it. The problem with gun violence is we're not throwing enough black and brown people into prison, even though they're not the ones shooting up the schools. But there is good news too, let's not forget. Today we had a walkout all across America where untold thousands of American children signaled they're tired of having to be shut up in school, of having to do drills of active shooters. It was a real moment when my first grader came home last week. He couldn't even elaborate on what the drill was for. Apparently they're not telling first graders someone could come into the school with an automatic rifle and shoot you up. So people went out and protested. Even at Queens College, where protests are like protests in cemeteries. Nobody really shows up for them. We had scores of students out protesting today. Democracy might matter. Earlier in the week, the Florida legislature did something that the Florida legislature absolutely did not want to do. It passed a gun law that the NRA didn't want. Sure, there were pro-NRA provisions in it, such as arming people, lots more gun sales there. But there were also provisions the NRA didn't want. And that's because of the fighting. That's because of the passion that is being displayed and had better remain displayed. Because what we are seeing over and over again is that as soon as the American public's enthusiasm for protecting itself dies down, the NRA's enthusiasm for making more money at the expense of America just overwhelms it. We can repeat what happened in Florida if we keep our guard up, our enthusiasm up. Right now, Congress is still considering the Hearing Protection Act. That's right, hearing protection, which is to allow silencers. Because gosh darn it, those weapons, those guns are so noisy. That'll really help with school shootings, allowing them to be done in silence. The House of Representatives has already passed concealed carry reciprocity, which basically means as long as the NRA can make some dipshit municipality somewhere in America offer concealed carry permits to any idiot who wants one, that will be the case everywhere in America, that people will be able to carry concealed weapons. The NRA is still pushing. I hope to see you all on March 24th for one of the marches around the country. We will be in New York. We hope to see you there or to hear that you were at some other march elsewhere in the country. Also regarding democracy, the tax bill, or as Republicans could call it, starve the beast. Give all your money to rich people, and therefore you don't have any money to spend on things like social programs, health care for old people, poor people, things like that. And we've seen how democracy can work in, of all places, West Virginia, where the West Virginia teachers went on strike and won because of their solidarity and their willingness to fight. Is Oklahoma next? Oklahoma teachers are 50th in the country for pay. Maybe they might want to fight to jump up to 49th or something. Oklahoma has seen a 28% reduction in per pupil spending over the last 10 years. 28%. That's not even almost Trump's approval ratings. Oklahoma teacher started this movement by creating a hashtag, a group called Begging for Education, a Facebook group, I guess. Begging for Education. Think about that for a moment. Let that one roll around. Begging for Education. Because the average elementary school teacher has to beg to get supplies for their students, making about $42,000 a year. In contrast, the richest man in Oklahoma is Harold Hamm. Now, Harold Hamm, to his credit, is an up-by-the-bootstraps, mostly self-made man who succeeded in the oil industry. Harold Hamm is worth about $14.1 billion. A few months ago, he was worth $11 billion, having accumulated an additional $3.1 billion to his wealth over the last 5 months. Or, assuming 300-hour months, working really, really hard, he made about $2 million an hour over that time. In other words, it took him about 1 minute and 6 seconds to earn what an Oklahoma teacher earns in a year. Over that 5-month span, he earned almost as much as every single teacher in Oklahoma earns in 2 years. Hashtag no billionaires. Fight for your rights, and instead of giving your resources to rich people, spend it where it's needed in shoring up America, including with our teachers. Want to fix our public education system? Let's start with this. End private education for our political leaders. Make them send their kids to public schools. And you know what? You're going to see the public schools get fixed real well. This is starve the beast, though Republicans, of course, will sell this as trickle down. So here at FNR, we would like to extend to you a limited time offer. That limited time, presumably infinity. A limited time offer. If you send us $1, in fact, for every $1 you send us, we will send you a check for 10 cents. That's right. Every dollar you send us, we will send you a check for 10 cents. Limited time. Hurry now. And now you understand the Republican tax bill. So, moving on, Republican swamp and security ethics update. Because we didn't get to do this last week, so hold on for a minute. Last week, we thought we were going to talk to you about Governor Eric Greitens of Missouri, who is indicted for felony invasion of privacy for, well, he ran a campaign highlighting the fact that he was a family man, but then it turns out, to keep his mistress silent, he took pictures and videos of her and threatened to release them to the public. The federal crime, no big problem there. We don't get to talk about that. That happened a long time ago. We don't get to talk about EPA Director Scott Pruitt's $36,000 plane flight from Ohio to New York from an infrastructure program. As Gail Collins pointed out in the New York Times, that $36,000 would have paved cracks in 110 square miles of roads. What a waste. Or it would have bought one dining set for Ben Carson and maybe half a door for Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke, who apparently spent about $130,000 of your money on doors for his office.
A door.
A door? I thought it was doors. Just one door? Must be a hell of a door. Must be a really nice door. Anyway, infrastructure conference just this week. President Trump announced that maybe we wouldn't be supporting the Hudson Tunnel, which everyone on the planet understands is absolutely necessary, a train tunnel between New Jersey and New York. Maybe we won't do that because, after all, New York and New Jersey are blue states, so screw them. We will, however, it turns out, have the money to run a transportation project to a Kushner family condominium complex that figures to make them greatly richer. That we do have the money for. We don't have time for all this because the big news of In-N-Out during the week was the firing of Secretary of State Rex Tillerson by tweet. That's right, our classy and brave president, who doesn't even have the decency or the bravery to tell people they're fired the Secretary of State by Twitter. His excuse? We were not really thinking the same. Which, of course, implies that the president is thinking at all, which is already a mistake. I don't understand. Were they not thinking the same on Monday or on Tuesday? Because whatever it is, Trump was the exact opposite on those 2 days.
Can you imagine if other bosses in whatever field throughout the country, throughout the world, if that became the norm to just fire somebody on Twitter? It's okay for the president to do it, but other bosses can't?
Yeah, well, we expect more from our business people.
Yeah,
just not so much the president.
But
of the
think
United
about
States.
that.
Are you hinting at something? Do I have to check my Twitter account right now? Ooh, there we go with my microphone. Do I have to check my Twitter at this point? Are you trying to say something to me? Anyway, we weren't really thinking the same. I know. A cynic would say, perhaps that's because your Secretary of State was thinking and saying, you are a fucking moron. Imagine if that took hold, that you can't call your boss a fucking moron. I don't mean to be standing up for Rex Tillerson, who never should have been chosen as Secretary of State. But let's be clear. He was fired because he showed vague signs of competence, which is problematic. Other ways he wasn't thinking the same as Trump? Well, he was biting the hand that feeds him. No, not by calling the president a fucking moron, by criticizing Vladimir Putin, his real boss. More on that in a few minutes. He also apparently was not militant enough. Imagine that. The Secretary of State actually thought he was like Secretary of State or something rather than Secretary of War. But don't worry, we've rectified that problem because we're going to be putting Mike Pompeo, current CIA director, into the Secretary of State position. One thing about Mike Pompeo, a former Republican congressman, he knows how to play the bitch. He knows how to play the lapdog. He will do what Trump wants him to do. And he will take what he's already done at the CIA undoubtedly to the State Department. And what does that mean? Less diversity, more religion. So the Secretary of State, I guess, can sit down with some of our foreign rivals and they could bond by praying to Jesus together. That'll bring us closer, for instance, to Iran, since we're apparently going to be ripping up the nuclear agreement, and that's why he wants Pompeo there. Pompeo is a great sign of why Donald Trump doesn't trust Obama appointees. And that's because he knows how he chooses his own appointees. Not for competence or respect for their job, but for fealty to their leader. So, Mike Pompeo is going to be out at the CIA, which leaves an opening for Cruella DeVille to move in. Oh, I'm sorry. I think that's her undercover spy name. Her real name, of course, is Gina Haspel. And we at least could be a little bit excited about this because, as I'm sure you've read, Gina Haspel will, in fact, be the first torturer to run the CIA. That's right. The first avowed torturer. Yes. She didn't just oversee torture programs, she apparently actually tortured people herself. Isn't that nice? Also, we can be proud that Gina is at least qualified for her job. Why? Well, her number one qualification to work in the Trump administration is experience in obstructing justice. And remember that Gina Haspel, while she was at the CIA, was responsible for deleting, against the law, the torture tapes that were being requested by courts and investigators. Oops, don't know where those went. I guess they're next to Hillary's emails. Remember when that was the biggest scandal on the planet? So over the week, it's not just Rex. We've got to ask ourselves the proverbial question, if a tree falls in the White House and there's nobody there to hear it, does it make a sound? Because the White House is getting hollowed out. Yes, there's Jared, who's still there, but not invited to all the same meetings because of his whole security clearance and selling access and selling government policy thing. And there's Hope Hicks, perhaps the first person to be fired as communication director for telling one lie too few. That's right, when she was testifying and pointed out that she did tell white lies for Donald Trump on occasion. And Trump said, how could you tell him that? She said, I lied. I told him they were white lies. He said, you didn't lie enough. You should have said you never lied. This was a big problem for the White House because many people were pointing out that Hope Hicks was like a daughter to Donald Trump. In other words, he thought she was a real piece of tail. His words, by the way, not mine. Or, as people in the White House might have been saying, she was the daughter he could legally screw. Even outside of Alabama. Her deputy is gone too. Then, it's already passé, Gary Cohn, the economic advisor who was crazy, but not quite crazy enough. And so was referred to as basically the last adult doing economic policy in the White House. When Trump decided he was going to start a nice little trade war, Gary Cohn said, I have enough. Nazis he could tolerate. Trade wars, you got to draw the line somewhere. And he drew the line there. Also in the last couple of days, hollowing out the White House, John McEntee, personal assistant, executive secretary, guy who had access to all kinds of secret information, not only couldn't get his security clearance, but apparently had engaged in such serious financial crimes and was so far away from getting his security clearance that he was immediately escorted from the White House without, reports indicate, being able to get his coat. Presumably they'll send that to him later. I hope they go through the pockets first. Poor Jeff Sessions, who's still in his job, apparently because the Senate has said, we won't let you replace him. But there's good news. Betsy DeVos is still here. That's right, our fearless education secretary is still here and representing the nation. Did you get her 60 Minutes interview? Which proved the old adage. If you are the education secretary that nobody ever hears from, people think you're an idiot. If people hear from you, you remove all doubt. And Betsy DeVos showed why she probably should go back and get an education, not having any clue about anything she's doing. This should be funny, but it's really not. This is the education secretary, and she's absolutely clueless. It's a good thing they didn't ask her what education was. but she was put in charge of the school safety group, which presumably will be considering how many more guns will be helping our schools. Better watch out, you grizzlies. As we know from Betsy's prior testimony, people need to be armed in school because, you know, grizzly bears. Again, not making this up. Ethics? We rolled back regulations this week for offshore oil drilling. In a future show, when we get a chance to go into deeper policy, which we never get to because of all the freaking crazy shit happening each week, we will be discussing Republican economic policy and what a pathetic joke it is. But rolling back regulations for offshore oil drilling? What could possibly go wrong? Well, the companies pushing for those relaxing of standards, in fact, have lots of safety and environmental violations already on their records. It's like putting the mob in charge of the New York City Police Department. What could go wrong? When was the most recent spill in the Gulf? Nothing to worry about. Oh, it turns out last October there was a huge spill you might not have heard about, and you might not have heard about it because nobody heard about it. That may have been the biggest spill since Deepwater Horizon. Perhaps close to 10,000 barrels or 420,000 gallons of oil spilled. But that's okay because the top Trump appointee official at the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, it turns out is an industry flack. Not regulating the industry. What could go wrong? IBG, YBG. You and your children are all going to get sick. We're going to destroy the environment. But that's going to happen in the future. The criminals are stealing the money now and don't have to worry about the future. Donald Trump also called for death to drug dealers. Yes, that was to influence the Pennsylvania race. Oops, that didn't work out, apparently. But death to drug dealers? I assume he means black guys, of course. I'm pretty sure he doesn't mean the people running pharmaceutical companies, which actually caused the opioid crisis in the first place. People like the Sacklers, who are great philanthropists and show up at all the big functions with the well-to-do, and who are responsible for OxyContin. Briefly, in the time we have left, we can't forget the international news. The president is going to sit down with Kim Jong Un, the president of North Korea. He's going to do that, of course, without our chief envoy to North Korea, who retired a week or so ago. North Korea's one condition to sit down with the president? Bring back Jared, because we could play him like a violin. Oh, wait, never mind. President Trump works just as well. The negotiator-in-chief, we'll promise him a golf course. He'll give us California and probably the entirety of the Korean Peninsula. Again, we laugh, but even within the Trump administration, they're like, holy shit, this can't happen. We can't trust this asshole to be in a room with Kim Jong Un. He may give away the Korean Peninsula and California. Who the hell knows? And finally, briefly, Russia. We didn't talk about Russia last week, so there's so much to talk about, but mostly what we have to talk about is, yes, we won, it's over. We've been declared the victor. The House Intelligence Committee inquiry ends. Republicans say, move along, folks, nothing to see here, move along, everything's good. At least that's what we think is going to happen. The report has not yet been translated from its original Russian. Also, the House Intelligence Committee decided to end its inquiry into the 2018, 2020, 2022, and 2024 elections. Nothing happening here, we're pretty sure. We're reminded of the head Democrat saying, for weeks, this committee has been all about protecting the president rather than actually doing its job protecting the American public. We are completely split. The Republicans are covering this up. The Democrats are releasing their own report. Devin Nunes, the guy who doesn't understand what recusal means, he may be in line to be our next education secretary, is actually moving forward with everything is fine, better things to do. Russia, meanwhile, is ramping it up, according to our own intelligence agencies, and our government is doing nothing to stop them, apparently, in future elections. Why? It worked out well for them the last time. And of course, as we're going to, whatever we're going to here, video, or whatever, I don't know, digital, Britain has just announced its response to the Russian government poisoning of former spy and double agent Sergei Skripal in England. Britain has announced that 23 Russian diplomats will be expelled from Great Britain as part of the response. We have no word yet whether they will be joining Johnny McEntee, in joining the Trump campaign for 2020. What spies couldn't find a good home in the Trump campaign? Also to be seen, which side is the United States going to be on here? Britain and Russia are in a serious diplomatic crisis because Russia used very toxic, awful nerve agents to attack this person in England.
It was interesting to see the British response. They gave Russia up until, what was it, a certain time yesterday to respond to the attacks. It's just remarkable, by contrast, how we deal with Russian attacks versus how our number one ally
It really does point out the extent, whatever is going on with Russia, that this administration will not do anything to go back at Russia. What they have on him is going to be remarkable. Let's hope that Mueller gets to the bottom of this. Seriously, we have to ask, which side are we on? Are we going to side with Britain and NATO? Or are we going to decide with Trump's masters, Vladimir Putin and Russia? And finally, before we leave, Betsy DeVos' brother is now involved in the Russia scandal with his Seychelles meeting, presumably about Hillary Clinton, trying to find out if she sells seashells by the Seychelles seashore. Been practicing that all day.
That's great.
Managed to do that. Wanted to do that. Finally, really finally, notice we've gotten through the whole show without saying porn star. One thing you got to hand it to the Trump administration, they are really able to change direction on one scandal, pull a red herring with lots of other scandals. Probably more on the porn star in the future. Anyway, thank you for joining us. If you like looking forward, go to forwardnationradio.com. That's forwardnationradio.com and get the full experience. You'll see the video from this and every one of our shows there. Don't miss the next Forward Nation Radio broadcast on Podbean at podbean.com. Please, if you are on Facebook, like us on Facebook, like us on Twitter, or whatever the hell you have to do on Twitter, retweet our tweets, something like that. And push the hashtag #NoBillionaires. Thanks for watching. See you next week.
You've been listening to Forward Nation Radio with David Leventhal.